Hey everyone, Chef Hamel here, and today I am going to be demonstrating how to make fresh homemade pasta from scratch. So the recipe we are going to be using is from the New York Times, their fresh egg pasta recipe that I've made a million times. It is an excellent recipe, it's easy to make, it's only a few ingredients, and it's definitely something that you can easily make at home. So the recipe calls for either all-purpose flour or 00 flour. So today I'm going to be using the 00 flour just because I recently purchased it and I want to try it out. I've never made it with this before. But 00 flour is often a flour that is used in pasta making because it is extra finely ground. And it just gives the pasta like a really soft, delicate texture. But all-purpose flour is just as good. All-purpose flour obviously is what most of us are going to have in our pantries at home. And it is a mixture of soft and hard wheat flour, so it kind of gives you the best of both worlds when it comes to flour, which is why it is considered all-purpose. If you have semolina flour, which I assume most people probably don't just have it on hand, that is also used in a lot of pasta recipes. Semolina flour is a little bit more coarsely ground than some other types of flour. I'm not going to be using this today, but I had it on hand. I figured I would just show you that. And another ingredient I want to talk about is extra virgin olive oil. One thing that I definitely don't skimp money on is extra virgin olive oil because the higher quality it is, the better it is for you. And it's also going to really transform your cooking because it has so much more flavor than your traditional olive oil. It's also less refined or less processed. There's very little processing involved in the making of extra virgin olive oil, so it's better for you. And there's just some things I want to talk about as far as reading the labels and reading the bottles, because extra virgin olive oil is something that there's kind of like a black market for it, and a lot of companies try to produce it for a lower price by either cutting it with other types of oil or more lower quality olive oil. And there's actually some lawsuits about it because they're lying to customers. So it's really, really important that when purchasing it that you read the label. So if you look at this label, this is a bottle I got at Costco. It has this emblem on it which just signifies that the product was made, or the olives were grown, and the oil was made and bottled in Tuscany. It also says down here that it was from the October, November, December 2019 harvest. So all of these things are indicators telling you that the product is from one location and that it is of high quality. Same with this. This one is from Portugal. It's Portuguese olive oil. And it also says on it that it was completely produced in Portugal. So when purchasing olive oil, another indicator is the container. So you want to look for either dark glass or a metal container because olive oil or extra virgin olive oil really should not be exposed to any sunlight at all or any light of any kind because it goes bad quicker. So I always store my olive oil in a cool place, usually underneath my sink where no sunlight can hit it or no light can hit it, and use it obviously as needed, take it out as needed. Trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to add about that. It's really good for you health-wise. It's really high in antioxidants. It can help lower blood pressure and improve your cardiovascular health. So that's another reason, of course, why I like to use extra virgin olive oil, just because it has a lot of health benefits and it's a really healthy fat to use in your cooking. So those are just some fun kind of housekeeping things. The next ingredient we're going to use is eggs. There are a million different recipes out there. Some use whole eggs, some use just egg yolks, some use a combination of the both. This recipe is 2 whole eggs and 3 egg yolks. So I saved the extra egg whites. I'll use them for my breakfast tomorrow. But in going through a lot of the recipes that I've used, there is a combination of both or one or the other. So you kind of have to sift through and see, but either way, they're all really good. And then 3/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. So another thing I want to say is there are a lot of really great recipes or cookbooks out there that you can use for reference. Lidia's Italian American Kitchen is one of my absolute favorite cookbooks. She's one of my favorite chefs, Lidia Bastianich. I don't know if she still does, but she used to have a cooking show on PBS that was great. A lot of her recipes are very rustic and simple, yet kind of time consuming. So a lot of her recipes I kind of make for special occasions because a lot of the steps are a little time consuming, and she likes to make a lot of things from scratch or a lot of components from scratch. So you're gonna get a great recipe or a great meal afterwards, but it's a little bit more effort, so it just kind of depends on what you're trying to make. This is another great recipe, Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking by Marcella Hazan. She's also known as one of the best Italian chefs out there. This has all different types of sauce recipes, soups, meat, like everything Italian that you can ever imagine. This is kind of like a Bible of Italian cooking. Another great cookbook that I love. If you're trying to be fancy and learn all kinds of cool pasta, this is another one of my favorite books. I actually discovered Linda Miller Nicholson on Instagram. Her Instagram tag is Salty Seattle, and she is based out of Seattle, and she creates works of art with pasta. All of her doughs are dyed with all natural ingredients, vegetables, herbs, all different kinds of stuff. And she makes, let me see if I can find some cool pictures, like rainbow pastas. I mean, really cool stuff. And so when I got her cookbook, I was very inspired. And I've made some of her recipes, the more simple ones. But I mean, she makes polka dot pasta, which is really awesome. And then she also makes like rainbow fettuccine, all kinds of striped pastas. Really, really fun. Definitely more time consuming to make. Not something you're gonna make for your average weeknight meal, but I just really love it. She's one of the chefs that really inspires me. Her videos on YouTube are great. And definitely kind of like a fun cookbook to make. Again, this is kind of very specialty, but really great. And the last one is Mastering Pasta by Marc Vetri. This is a really, really great cookbook for basic pasta tips and tricks. He goes through all the different types of flour that you can use, the type, you know, egg, let's see, different ways to cut the pasta, to shape the pasta, the salt that you should use, the different oil that you can use, how to roll it, how to mix it, how to cut it. I mean, everything is broken down in very easy to read and understand language. So I really like this book a lot. I was actually toying with doing one of his pasta recipes, but then I figured I would do the typical recipe that I usually make. So with all that said, we are going to start our recipe. So the first ingredient is going to be 290 grams of the 00 flour or all-purpose flour. I'm going to use the 00. The recipe, which I will put in the description, also has the American measurements as well. So I'm using a digital scale because it is the most accurate way to measure flour. So you'll have to make sure when you're using a digital scale that you tare the measurement, which means that you are only measuring the flour and not the bowl. So I am going to add this in until I get to 290. This finished recipe is going to make about a pound of pasta. And I'm gonna make it in the bowl. You can make this recipe with a food processor, but I think it's kind of fun to make it by hand because you can really feel the dough. You could make this recipe completely on your countertop, but just for mess purposes, I'm gonna make it in the bowl. You're gonna add in your kosher salt and make sure you mix that up well in your pasta, or in your flour, excuse me, getting ahead of myself. Now you're gonna make a well in the bowl. So you're gonna push the flour to the sides of your bowl, and you're going to add in your 2 whole eggs and your 3 egg yolks. And you're going to add in a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. And between the olive oil and the eggs, it's going to add a lot of richness to this pasta dough, which is delicious. So now is the fun part. So we're going to scramble our eggs in the bowl, in the middle, breaking them up as much as we can. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use our fork to go around the edges to slowly start incorporating the flour. And this is the fun part. It's fun to make on the counter, I have to say, but it's also a little bit messy for cleanup purposes, so that's why I'm kind of making it in the bowl. But it's the same exact process. You just got to make sure when you do it on the table that you keep your walls of flour intact, otherwise you have kind of like an eggy volcano and it can be quite messy. So I'm just incorporating the flour from the edges, and it's coming together slowly but surely. Now once I incorporate enough flour, I can actually go in with my hands and finish the dough. It's going to be a little sticky still, so I'm just kind of adding in some more flour. But really the best way to make any kind of dough, whether it's bread or pasta, is to use your hands. Your hands are your best tool. Your hands are going to let you know if you need to add more flour. Your hands are going to let you know if you need to add more liquid. There's really nothing that compares. It's the best tool we have in the kitchen. So I'm just kind of using my hands to bring this together. If this is too dry, which I don't think it will be, I am going to add a tablespoon more of olive oil. The other important thing with pasta or any kind of dough is if there is a lot of excess flour, you don't always want to force it to incorporate, because it's just going to make your dough very dry. So this seems dry to me, which is fine, it happens. So I'm going to get some of this off my hands. I'm going to add another tablespoon of olive oil, and then I will see. From there, I can add a little bit of water if I need to. If you want to make a flavored pasta dough, that would be really great too. I'm going to leave a link in the description of how you can do that to add additional flavor into your pasta. So you can make an herb pasta with like parsley or chives, spinach pasta with some blanched spinach, etc. So So this is still dry, which is okay, it happens. A lot of times making pasta or bread, the humidity in the air, the temperature in your house, like all of that stuff affects the flour and the egg, you know, and how your dough kind of comes together. I'm gonna add just a little bit of flour, sorry, just a little bit of water until this comes together a little more. So after all of this kind of comes together, we're gonna knead it ever so slightly. And then we need to let this rest for about an hour. By kneading the dough, you are activating the gluten that is in the wheat flour. And the gluten is what gives pasta its shape. It's what gives bread its shape. And the easiest way to kind of explain gluten is that it's like little rubber bands within the dough. And by kneading, you're activating those rubber bands, and those rubber bands get tighter and tighter and tighter. And if you were to try to roll this pasta dough out right now, it is just gonna spring right back at you. It is not even gonna be able to be rolled out because the gluten is gonna be so activated. So by letting the dough rest, you're letting those rubber bands relax so that when you can roll, so that when it's time to roll out, it rolls out very easily and it won't contract back at you. So I'm just pretty much kneading this ever so slightly, just so the outside of the dough is nice and smooth. It's definitely an arm workout. Alrighty, so that is pretty good. I don't want to over knead it. So at this point, I have a nice smooth pasta dough ball, which looks so great. So I am going to very gently wrap this in some plastic wrap so that it stays nice and moist. You don't want the dough ball to dry out. And it's going to rest on the counter for an hour. After that, we'll come back and roll out our pasta dough. Hey guys, welcome back. So I have finished rolling and shaping all of my beautiful pasta. So as you can see here, I rolled half of the dough, or shaped half of the dough, into the garganelli, which is that homemade penne-like shape. And the other half I made into these beautiful, adorable little bow ties. So I'm actually gonna cook I'm gonna cook the garganelli tonight, probably in some sort of like tomato-based sauce. I think I might add some seafood into it because I have some in my freezer. And the other half, the bow ties, I am going to save for tomorrow. So I will probably leave them on this baking sheet with a little bit of the 00 flour on the bottom just so they don't stick, and they will dry out overnight. So just some quick tips and tricks for cooking pasta. It's really, really, really important that you salt your pasta water. This is going to fully season the pasta. Although there is some salt in the actual dough, adding a little bit of salt to the pasta water really is going to fully season it. So there is a ratio. I do not know it off the top of my head. I will post a link in the description below. But when I make it, the rule of thumb I kind of use is you should be add enough salt so that you taste it. So when you taste the pasta water, you should be able to taste the salt content. Some people say it should taste like seawater. I don't know if it quite needs to be that salty, but there should be enough salt in it so that you do taste it. And that's going to fully season the pasta as it cooks, because it will absorb the water and absorb that salt content as it boils. Another thing to keep in mind is that you should be cooking your pasta till al dente. So al dente in Italian means to the tooth, and what that means is that you should be cooking your pasta so it has a little toothsomeness, or it has a little bit of texture, a little bit of bite to it. So you should be cooking it about 90 to 95% of the way through in the boiling water. And then I like to use a spider or some sort of slotted scoop or spoon or strainer or something to scoop the pasta out of the boiling water and then add it directly into the sauce that you're using in a separate pan that is already heating up. You want to finish the pasta in the sauce so that the pasta actually absorbs the flavor of the sauce versus just cooking the pasta completely through and then tossing it in the sauce after, because you're just coating the pasta, but the pasta itself is not actually absorbing any of the flavor. And the nice thing about these garganelli is because there's all those beautiful ridges on the outside, those ridges are really going to hold the sauce really well. So that's something to keep in mind when choosing your pasta shape or making your pasta shape. Another thing to keep in mind is that you should always reserve a little bit of your pasta water. As the pasta cooks, it releases some starch, and that starch is in the water, so you'll see a lot of times your pasta water at the end will be very cloudy. That is perfect for thickening your sauces. So you really want to make sure that you reserve some of that, and when you add your pasta to the sauce, add a little bit of that water as needed, and it will help the sauce thicken and really come together to a really, really nice consistency. What else? I think that is about it with all of my pasta cooking tips and tricks. If you have any questions about this pasta recipe, please comment down below and I will get back to you. I'm going to leave a bunch of links as well as the recipe in the description. And thank you so much for watching.